kind of yapping on about how Isaac Newton or whatever was, I don't know, sitting down and he seen an apple fall from the tree, and you wonder, was that apple green or red, or maybe it was blue? Google has just dropped a 68-page AI prompt engineering guide, and what I'm going to be doing in this video is basically explaining the 11 main points, the 11 key takeaways, so that you guys don't have to go through and spend 482 years of your life trying to go through and decipher what all of this text means like you're Indiana Jones or something. I've never actually seen that movie, so I don't even know if that makes sense. But for each of these 11 points, we're going to be going through and explaining what it means, why it's important to kind of incorporate into your prompting workflow, as well as an example so that you guys can better understand how it might work in practice rather than just in theory like we're talking about it. Now, you guys know that I always come prepared, right? So what I've gone ahead and done is I've created this PDF document. As you can see, it says Google 68-page prompt engineering guide summary, and it's basically going to be summarizing the entire 68-page guide and basically everything that we talk about throughout this video. So if you guys, don't want to come back to this video every time you're trying to make prompts, you can just download this guide. Again, like always, it'll be in the free community. If you just head on over once you sign up, there'll be a learn tab over here. You just click on all free PDF guides, and this document, along with everything else that I have for you guys for free, will be in this folder right here. So that's pretty much it. If you want access to that, you can work along with everything that I'm saying when you make your own prompts. Now, of course, if you guys do want to go through and read the actual raw 68-page guide, then I will leave a link in the description. But yeah, beware, this is literally what you're going to be looking at right here. So I mean, if that's what you like to do in your spare time, then by all means go ahead. I will leave a link to it. But let's get into the actual video now. Now, just so there's some kind of order to this video, what I've gone ahead and done is I've ordered everything in such a way that what I believe is the best and most transformational prompt practices to use are going to be at the end of the video. So it's kind of going to be working our way up. Now let's get started with point number one. So point number one is going to be that you need to be collaborating with a team. Now, when I say team, obviously I don't necessarily mean like colleagues or people you're working with. It could even just be friends. Maybe you're in high school and maybe you just have some of your boys who are interested in using ChatGPT and stuff, and you kind of get together and you're like, bro, look at what this prompt did, look at what it told me when I told it this. It's just kind of that process of receiving feedback, giving feedback, an infinite loop of trying to kind of learn and get better together. It really is the same with pretty much anything. Obviously, shared insights, working with other people, is always going to lead, or most of the time is going to lead to better results than if you're just a lone wolf trying to headbutt everything and figure it out yourself. So obviously an example of this one would simply be, I don't know, just brainstorming with your friends, or like sitting down at a computer together and saying, oh, what does it come up with if I do this? Or you could be streaming on Discord, whatever. You guys understand the point. That's point number one. Now, point number two is going to be something that I realized really early on when I started using prompts in these AI models, and that's going to be that you need to document all of your prompt iterations. So what this means is that, simply put, just keep track of keep a record of all of the changes that you've made to your main prompts. If you come across a prompt that you like, then save it somewhere. It could be in like Notion or OneNote, or even your notes folder inside your phone, whatever it may be. Just save it somewhere. You could even write it down on a pen and pad if you want to, but keep track of it, because as these AI models change, as things change, when you realize this prompt works like this and this works like that, you're going to want to iterate on the prompts that you've already had some success with. So why is this important? Well, it helps you keep track of kind of what is working best, and it also helps you avoid the mistakes that you might have made in the past. So without having to go through your memory and think, okay, that didn't work, the prompt that you've saved in your notes folder or whatever kind of already takes that into account, so you don't have to keep making the same mistakes that you made 3-4 months ago. Now, a quick example of good prompt iterations might be if you go to ChatGPT and you type up write a story, and obviously that's not the best prompt, but maybe you type in write a story and you really liked what ChatGPT responded with, and then you think maybe a week later you're like, okay, I liked what it responded with, but I kind of want it to be a certain length. So then you go back and you reiterate and you say, write a 500-word story about a brave cat, and then you really like this version of the prompt, but then even a couple days later you're like, wait, maybe I can make this even better. So you go back and you reiterate again, and then you say, write a 500-word story about a brave cat that grows up in Jupiter. I don't know, man. You understand what I'm saying here. You start with a base prompt, you like what it produces, and then you keep building on that, and you'll realize that over the course of months, guys, these prompts are going to turn into behemoths of high quality prompts that you can go back and reuse whenever you're doing whatever work that you want to do. Now, number three is going to be that you need to be using variables. And if you don't know what this means, it's essentially just using using placeholders, like instead of putting someone's actual name, you just put, brackets and then name in the middle, or brackets and then date in the middle. It's basically just things that are going to be changing dynamically, so you don't have to go through and actually manually type the name each time. You can simply just say, use this variable, and then input whatever name that I give you. Now, why is this important? Well, obviously it's because it saves time and it creates prompts that are adaptable. Now, an example of this could be, the template might be that you say, write a thank you note to in brackets name for attending the event on in brackets date, okay? And then the result will be that whatever name that you actually tell it to input into those variables, it'll automatically do that rather than you having to type up the whole message again. Point number 4 is going to be that you need to be experimenting with different input formats and writing styles. Now, what does this mean? Well, put simply, it's just that you need to try different structures in order to feed the LLM information in the best way possible that produces the best results. So for example, if you've got maybe a bunch of different data to do with different people, then maybe you would want to put that data into a table and then give the LLM the table and say, based on this table, whatever, you know what I mean? Instead of just a bunch of different text that you're trying to put otherwise. And why is this important? Well, obviously different formats guide the AI's focus and can improve results depending on what you're trying to achieve. So like I said, one of the best examples that I can use is if there's a circumstance where you're comparing different events or different people, then you'd want to give the LLM that data inside the context of a table so it can directly compare whatever's inside the table to each other, rather than, it could still do a decent result if you're just describing it with raw text, but it's always going to be better if it's organized data that the LLM is getting. Now, to lead on from that last point about experimenting with input formats, tip number 5 is actually going to be experimenting with output formats. And this is actually one of my favorite points because it's something that I've started to do recently that has genuinely transformed the way that I use AI. So let me explain what it means. So like we explained with input formats, it's basically the format in which you give the LLM the data that it needs to produce the outcome, right? Well, as you would probably infer, output formats is the same thing, but instead of you inputting the data, it's how you receive the data, okay? So you might ask for data in, a JSON file, or you might ask for it in a table format or a list format or a markdown or whatever it might be. And why is this important? Well, similarly to the last point, it reduces the time that you spend on, editing or organizing the results into whatever format that you want. You can just ask it to produce it directly in that format rather than you getting the raw text and then having to organize it yourself. Now, a really great example of this is something that actually happened to me quite recently. So long story short, I had a conversation with ChatGPT. It was quite a long conversation, and I wanted to kind of continue that conversation in a different LLM. In this case, the LLM was Grok, because I just like to use Grok when it comes to things to do with statistics and data analysis and that type of stuff. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to take the context of the conversation with ChatGPT and continue in Grok. And this is when I found out that you can actually basically get ChatGPT to give you all of the context in a JSON file, and then all you have to do is basically copy the JSON file, upload it to Grok or whatever LLM that you want to use, and you can literally basically continue the conversation you were having with ChatGPT inside another LLM. And obviously that works with whatever 2 LLMs that you want to use. It's actually one of the most insane, useful tips that I've talked about in this video so far. All right, now tip number 6 is going to be that you need to be continually testing your prompts. And this kind of ties into what I was saying before about how you need to be, storing the prompts that you make as you go along so you can improve on them. Long story short, what this means is that you need to retest the prompts when the LLM models update and when AI just in general updates, because what a lot of you noobs might not understand, like if you're just new to AI and you don't know how things work and you're getting used to it, is that these models update literally almost on a daily basis. Gemini will update, then OpenAI will update their models, and then you've got the image generation models. Everything's just updating constantly. So a prompt that you might have given a month prior might have produced results, but then if you fast forward a month, it might produce really good results. So things change over time, and you need to keep that in mind. A great example might be, I believe when ChatGPT was called ChatGPT, GPT-3 or something, you might have given a prompt that it produced, a bad result or whatever. But now that is ChatGPT 4.0 or whatever models come after ChatGPT 572, that prompt might actually turn into a good prompt, which you might want to use. So just keep that in mind. It's kind of a simple thing, but just test on the prompts that you've already built and see how the LLM might have been changing or updating its models in order to account for whatever prompts you've been using in the past. Point number 7 that Google talks about is going to be the fact that you need to be using positive positive instructions rather than constraints. Now, what this means is that there needs to be a focus on what the AI should be doing instead of what it should not be doing. And this kind of takes me back to high school when I had a visual arts class, because I believe in art, there's kind of a term that refers to negative and positive space. And although I can't really summarize exactly what it means, the best way that I can describe it is that positive space is kind of the things that are filled in, and negative space is the space that is left empty. So to kind of map that onto the context of an LLM, you need to be saying what it should be doing rather than what it should not be doing. And why is this important? Well, the AI models respond much better to positive instructions, and it's easier for them to actually follow along with what you're trying to say. Another example that I can provide for this, if you've used any image generation or video generation AI model in the past, pretty much all of them suck horrendously when it comes to the negative prompt section. I know you guys have seen it. There'll be, for example, image generation, there'll be a negative prompt box, and you might say, text or fingers or stuff like that you do not want to include in the image. And for some reason you'll click generate, and everything that you described to not include in the image will somehow end up in the image. It's absolutely horrendous. So make sure you're focusing on telling the AI what to do instead of what not to do. Another example might be that a bad prompt would be that you say, do not write in a casual tone. And then a good prompt of that same kind of scenario would be, instead of saying do not write in a casual tone, you would say write in a formal tone, because that's the positive instruction. All right, point number 8 is going to be chain of thought best practices. Now, the simple way that I can put this is that it really is just providing a step-by-step, instructions for the models to produce the best outcomes, because I know I'm kind of guilty of this as well. A lot of you guys, when you get into AI, you will just kind of spit everything out onto the screen, everything you're trying to get the LLM to do. There's no really organization. You're not trying to break it down into steps. Basically, the point of this topic is that you need to break things down into steps so the model can actually follow along and be like, okay, step 1, I need to do this. Step 2, I need to do this. And in the end, you produce a much better whole outcome than if you were to just say, do all of this at once. So it's essentially important because it helps the AI break things down into manageable, bite-sized tasks that it can execute one by one. Now, as you guys already know, or if you didn't know, I use AI to build websites and sell them for thousands of dollars. It's actually really easy. And when I do that, this is why I'm using this as a perfect example. When I do that, I don't just say, build me a website like this and like this and like this and like this and make it look like this and all this. I literally break it down exactly what it's talking about right here into step-by-step instructions. So I'll say, I want to build a website, and you want to start with that because then it knows that's the whole overall goal. That's what we're working towards. It's the ultimate goal for this prompt. And then I'll say, I want to build a website. Let's start with this. After that, let's make sure that it's like this. Then let's make sure that the color palette or whatever is like this. And you're breaking things down so that it understands, okay, we've done this, now we can move on to this. So it's a really great example because I quite literally do that whenever I use AI to build websites. Now, point number 9 is a very simple point, and it's going to be that you need to be specific about the output, which kind of ties into what we were talking about before when it said that you need to experiment with different output formats. And the reason why it ties in is because this is essentially the fact that you need to explicitly define to the LLM the desired format, the style, the length, any other characteristics to do with the output that you want it to produce whenever you are requesting it to do whatever. And it's important to do this because models perform better, AI models perform better when they know exactly what the outcome is meant to be. So they can kind of say, okay, you've given me this input and I know that the output is meant to be in this format. Now I'm just going to connect the two dots together and fill in the gap. So an example of a bad prompt in this situation might be that you say, summarize this article, and you provide an article. And actually, a lot of people do that. But a better example might be, for the same kind of prompt scenario, might be if you say, provide a 3-sentence summary of this article in bullet points focusing on this. Okay, and that's a much better prompt format because you're specifically saying this is the exact format style, this is the exact writing style. It's everything that you want combined into one simple, concise input. All right, now point number 10 might be, in my opinion, one of the most important tips I can give you guys when it comes to prompt engineering. Actually, it might be the most important just behind point number 11. And so this is going to be the fact that you need to start simple when you're talking to these LLMs. Now, what this means, obviously, you need to be using short, clear, concise, action-oriented prompts. And like we talked about before, try to make sure that it's positive, action-oriented prompts. And the reason why this is important, guys, like I said, when I first started using AI, I was very, very guilty of just writing a massive paragraph, a massive novel, thinking that the more information that AI has to deal with, the better outcome it'll be able to produce. What we don't realize is that that, or at least when we're starting, what we don't realize is that sometimes the more information that you give, you kind of reach a point of diminishing returns where it's kind of looping over. It's almost like the snake game, I think, where it runs into itself because it's getting too long. There's so much information that it just starts conflicting with itself and bad stuff starts to happen, okay? So make sure that it's as clear and concise and short as it could possibly be. And what this does is, obviously why it's important, it reduces the confusion and it makes the AI more likely to be able to give a useful response in return. So a random example of a bad prompt related to this might be that you want to know more about how gravity works, and instead of focusing on exactly that point, that you want to know more about how gravity works, you're kind of yapping on about how Isaac Newton or whatever was I don't know, sitting down and he seen the apple fall from the tree, and you wonder, was that apple green or red, or maybe it was blue, who knows what it was back then. You're just yapping, bruv, okay? Now a good prompt would simply be to just say, write a short paragraph explaining how gravity works. That's it, okay? You don't need to yap, that's it. And I think that's one of the best points that I could really address in this whole video. Now, before I get into the 11th and final prompt here, guys, if you guys run a business, I do have a website here, brandboostai.com.au. There'll be a link in the description or in the comment below, whatever. If you guys run a business, we can install basically whatever AI service that you want us to do. Cool. There'll be a link at the bottom of the, at the bottom of the website, which has a booking. It's a free booking, free consultation. We can talk to you about whatever it is that you want to install into your business. Bunch of options here. If you want it, then go to the website. Cool. Now let's get into the final tip. So the final and by far the most important point that Google mentions in the 68-page guide is going to be that you need to provide high quality examples to whatever LLM you're using. And this could be if you're trying to produce an image or a video or a table. It's literally anything, guys. These LLMs will perform substantially better if you just provide it with a couple examples or even just one example. Now what this means, obviously it's kind of simple to understand. You just need to provide a detailed and specific examples that kind of show the model the exact thing or a very similar thing that you wanted to produce or you wanted to provide. Now, why is this important? Well, by teaching the LLM with examples, it sets clear expectations for the AI and it helps it understand the output that it needs to produce, so you don't have to kind of, or it doesn't have to kind of do any guesswork to say, oh, he's asked for this, I'm just going to assume that he wants this. No, if you provide the example, it's basically an exact thing. There's very little error or very little margin for error when it comes to providing examples. So I'll just use an image generation example here because it's really what I started with AI and it's probably what I have the most experience in. So if you wanted to produce a certain image, you might provide a reference. Let's say, for example, you wanted to produce an image of a house. Then you might provide an image that kind of holds all the characteristics that you want the AI to produce. So for example, you might say, still in the text prompt, you might say, produce an image of a double-story realistic house made out of wood in the mountains, okay? But you're not just going to leave that prompt alone. You're going to keep that text prompt there and you're going to provide a reference image of literally everything that you just listed. Now, it might not be exactly the same, but as long as it's close enough to your desired outcome, that'll greatly help the output of the AI to the point where you barely even actually need to include the text prompt. It's kind of just the cherry on top to help it produce whatever it is you want it to produce. There's also kind of three important things that you guys need to remember when it comes to this point, I guess. So the first thing is going to be, when you're providing examples, there's two different routes you can go. The first kind of term is called one-shot prompting, which is simply if you just provide one example. So in the scenario we were talking about, you provide one image of the house that you want it to produce, right? The second format is going to be few-shot prompting, which, like the name suggests, is going to be if you provide multiple examples. Now, generally speaking, what I would recommend is 2 to 3 examples at the absolute maximum. After that, it gets into the third thing that I wanted to talk about, which is kind of overtraining the AI model, or to the point where it becomes a little bit confused. And I believe there's a terminology, there's a term for this called overfitting. So you just want to avoid that. In general, guys, to simplify everything I just said, try to keep the examples between 1 and 3. So that's everything. Thanks for watching. I'm out. Bye.